So this is too long, didn't read. Part 2, dose. This is our second section. We're going to be talking a little bit about property ownership and taxation. Now remember, all of this is a preview, not a review. I am not doing this because you don't have to read the chapters. I need you to read the chapters before class. But if you don't, if it was a bit much, this is just so you have an idea of what we'll be talking about when we go over this section. All right? In fact, here's an outline. Well, and by outline, I mean outline. Here's an outline of what we're going to be talking about in this section. It is first, what is real estate? So just like if you go to a store, you're hoping that the person you're talking to knows something about their inventory. You need to know something about real estate. What is real estate? What is not real estate? That's going to be our personal property versus our fixtures. And we're going to find out the rights that you get with them. After that, we'll move on to encumbrances. And after we talk about encumbrances, which by the way means the rights that you don't get or if they've been limited, we'll talk about how it is that you can own real estate. So how long can you own real estate? What are the rules if more than one person owns the real estate? It's all very legal mumbo jumbo, but very important for you to understand so that you can really help your clients. And then we'll end out this section with taxes because we pay taxes on everything and real estate is no exception. So I hope you're ready and let's get started. So the first question, what is real estate? When you did your reading, I'm sure you saw that there's actually land and then real estate and real property. Land is the surface of the earth, everything below, all of the skies and heavens above. And then real estate is land plus anything that is permanently attached, whether it is natural or artificial. So if it's a house and it's attached to the real estate, or the land I should say, then it is real estate. And then real property is when you have the land plus all the permanent attachments, real estate, plus all the rights that come along with it. So real estate, land, real property, they usually become intertwined. And unless you get a question specifically about it, just assume they're generally used to mean the same thing, right? Now, if you know that real estate is something that is permanently attached to the land, then what we call the things that are not permanently attached are personal properties or personal property. It can also be called chattel or personalty, but if it's permanently attached to the land or something else that's permanently attached, that is real estate. If it's something you can pick up, like, I don't know, my stapler or my calculator, that's going to be considered personal property. Sometimes what you do is you take a piece of personal property and you permanently attach it to the real property, and we call that a fixture. We'll go over in class what some of these different fixtures could be, and we're also going to talk about the best way to determine what a fixture is. But think about the space you're in right now. What do you see that is real property, that is personal property, and that's a fixture? That's going to be very important, and especially when you start selling houses. So we talked about what real estate and real property is. And when you buy real property, you also get the rights that come along with it. Most real property is going to come with this concept that we call the bundle of rights. When you buy something, you assume you have the right to use it or you have the right to sell it. The same is true with land. In fact, you're going to get this bundle of rights that I like to think of an acronym Deep C. You're going to get the right of disposition. You're going to get the right of enjoyment or to use it, the right of exclusive possession, and the right of control. The right of disposition, you can use it, sell it, will it, whichever. The right of enjoyment, which is actually the use. Right? The right of exclusive possession, and the right of control. You should note that these can come apart. These are not all the rights that you get, but sometimes you can buy something and not have the ability to sell it. You could own something and not be able to use it in certain ways. So some of these rights can be limited or taken away, but in general, when you buy a piece of real estate, you get these rights plus some others, which we'll go into detail. Like we'll talk about water rights and air rights, things like that. So I just mentioned that you get rights and sometimes they can be taken away. By definition, an encumbrance is anything that may diminish how much you can use or the value of a piece of real property. So you see our definition here, anything that may diminish the value or use and enjoyment of a property. Now there's a lot of different types of encumbrances, but there's 3 or 4 that we really are going to focus on in class. That's going to be liens, easements, encroachments, and land use controls. Liens, easements, encroachments, land use controls. Now in this video, I'm telling you very quickly, for land use controls, think restrictive covenants or deed restrictions. There's something that is like a set of rules telling you what you can and can't do. But let's go into a little bit of detail about our liens, easements, and encroachments. Now liens. By definition, a lien is a charge against a person or a property. A lien means somebody or a piece of property owes somebody else some money. Now there are 2 flavors or 2 categories of liens. You've got your specific liens. Your specific liens are a charge against a specific property. For example, let's take a mortgage lien. Let's say I own 2 homes. One is in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, the greatest town in America because God is a Tar Heel. That is why the sky is Carolina blue. Go Tar Heels. And the other one is in that city, Durham, which is a lovely place, except for it's got that school that rhymes with puke. The name we do not say. But let's say I have 2 houses, one in Durham, one in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. If I don't pay my Durham mortgage, can they just come and take my Chapel Hill home? No, of course not, because that mortgage is tied specifically to that Durham home. That is a specific lien, a lien or a claim against a specific property. Similarly, if I had somebody do work on that Durham home, maybe I had it painted, maybe I had an architect come in and do some drawings for me, I could have had a fence put in. Anytime somebody does any type of work on the home and I don't pay them, then that person can file a lien against my home. That means they're telling the world, hey, I did work on this property and this property owes me some money. Another type of specific lien would be a real property tax lien. Just like you pay taxes on your car every year based on how much it's worth, every year, if you own houses or land, you're going to pay a tax. It's due on September 1st, and it's going to be based on how much it's going to be based on what the value of the home is. Right? So those are our specific liens. You see, they're specific against one property. We also have general liens. A general lien is when a charge or a claim is brought against a person, and literally the best example is the IRS. You know that if you owe the IRS money, they can take anything you own, including your freedom. So yeah, IRS lien, general lien, it's against a person. Hope that helps. If not, we'll talk about it in class, so don't worry about it. But remember, a lien is a type of encumbrance. It's limiting the value sometimes in the properties. Another type of encumbrance is going to be an easement. An easement is the right to cross or to use somebody's land. Now, I'm sure you've seen an easement or you've heard somebody talk about a utility easement, a gas easement, a water easement. That's when a utility company is using or crossing somebody's land. They don't take ownership. They're just crossing a piece of land. But sometimes you might have a piece of land that needs the right to cross another land. Let's say you have a property that is landlocked or surrounded by somebody else's land and the owner can't get to a public right-of-way. When that is the case, sometimes you'll find these properties have an easement, or one property has the right to cross another property. This right to cross a property runs with the property that is landlocked, and it is appurtenant, or it means it runs with or it's attached to a property. An appurtenant easement is when there are two properties and one property has the right to cross another property. A similar sounding word is encroachment. An encroachment is a fancy way of saying an invasion. Or as you can see in this picture, you've got a swimming pool on the property on the right, and it's invading, or it's in the space of, the property on the left. This is an encroachment, and you will learn the best way to find encroachments on a property is by getting a survey. So we were talking about our encumbrances, whether they're liens, a charge against a person or a property, or it could be an easement, a right to use or to cross, or an encroachment, which would be an invasion, or somebody's property is spilling on to somebody else's. And remember, there are the land use controls like your zoning. So now that you know that you can own property and that there's things like fixtures, and we know there are things that are going to take away your rights, we should probably talk about estates. Estates are or I should say, an estate is when you have the right to own a property. Okay, well, it helps if I give you the right definition. Let me start over. An estate is the right to possess a property. The right to possess a property. So when you're renting a property, you know you have the right to live there. That's an estate. It's what we call a non-freehold estate, because you have the right to live there. We call it non-freehold because it's not a freehold estate. And by definition, freehold means ownership. So a freehold estate is when you own a property that you have the right to live in. A non-freehold estate is renting. It's also known as a leasehold. It's when you have the right to live there, but you don't own it. Now, our leasehold estates, our non-freehold estates, we will go over when we talk about property management and landlord-tenant stuff. In this chapter, we're really going to focus on our freehold estates. So you see this chart? If you really look at it, and we'll take a deeper dive in class, it goes all the way from the left, from owning a property forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever, all the way to the right in the blue, which is you have the right to live there, but you never owned it. The color in between, or each step in between, means it's a level between, hey, I can live there and I own it, and I can live there and I don't own it. Honestly, the best way to kind of get a handle on these estates, in my opinion, is to understand the vocab. So I'm going to go over some of the vocab with you right now so that when we piece it together in class, it makes much more sense. So you see here, estate is the meaning, or I should say, an estate means that you can possess or that you can live there. And I've already mentioned that freehold means ownership, and non-freehold or leasehold is non-ownership. They're both estates. You can live there. It's just a question of, do you own it or do you not? To help you learn everything, I want you to think of the word fee to mean inheritable. So all of our fee estates are estates of inheritance. Somebody can inherit it. And when you see absolute, I want you to think that it's absolute ownership. Ownership forever. Which means if you own a property as a fee simple absolute, you will own it forever and ever and ever. There's no reason why it would have to leave your ownership unless you decided to sell it or give it away, or it's taken because maybe you owed somebody some money. One of those liens, perhaps? So ownership forever and ever and ever. That is a fee simple absolute, and it's the strongest way to own a property. Now, a slight step down from that is going to be your fee simple defeasibles. And when I say defeasible, I want you to think of your ownership can be defeated for a reason that you didn't necessarily choose. Now, it's possible you could own it forever like a fee simple absolute, but in a fee simple defeasible, somebody has put a rule or a limitation on the property where if you mess this up, you could lose ownership. And we have two types of defeasible estates. A fee simple determinable means if you mess up and you do what you weren't supposed to do, that property automatically reverts back to the person that you gave it to or somebody else. And if it's a fee simple conditional, then if you mess up, the original grantor would have to take you to court in order to get their property back. Think conditional starts with a C, and so does court, right? So you've got your fee simple absolute, or you have your defeasible estates. And if it's defeasible, it's either determinable, which automatically reverts, or it's conditional and the original grantor has to go to court. So aside from our fee estates, we also have life estates. And a life estate is when an original owner or grantor owns a property and gives ownership. They transfer ownership to somebody else. They give to somebody, whether it's a family member or friend, somebody wants to buy it, who knows? It's, let's say I own a property. I give it to you for the lifetime of a person. Life estate means somebody owns an estate. Somebody can live there, own it, pay the taxes on it, as long as somebody is alive. Our two categories really here is the question, is it while you're alive or is it while somebody else is alive? So if I give you a property as long as you are alive, that is just a basic life estate. I do, however, have the ability to say, hey, you can have this property as long as my cousin is alive. If my cousin, or when my cousin dies, because nobody lives forever, but when that person dies, you would no longer be the owner. Your ownership is based off the life of another person. And that is what we call por atri v. Por atri v, for the life of another. That's when you, the new owner, who we call the life tenant, only owns the property as long as somebody else is alive. That somebody else is the measuring life. And if the life tenant, the new owner, and the measuring life are different, that is a por atri v life estate. So I think that pretty much sums that up. Now, I did a very basic explanation of this, but I'm hoping by hearing these words, this vocabulary before class, it helped clear up some of your reading, as well as make it a little easier for you as we go into much more detail in the classroom. So, if we've talked about how long you can own a property, we should talk about what happens when there's multiple owners. Now, ownership by one person is ownership in severalty. If we have ownership by more than one person, that is going to be co-ownership. So there are 3 different types that we are going to have to know for this test. The first is going to be tenancy in common. And this is ownership that you expected would have happened even before you were in a real estate class. Tenancy in common means you have multiple owners. They all have equal possession. They all have the same right to use and possess the property. However, the ownership interest does not have to be the same. So if you and I own a property together, perhaps you own 80% and I own 20%. That's fine. A tenancy in common is just the normal way 2 people could own a piece of real estate. And remember, if you die, because I don't want to kill myself off, even just fake, but if you die, then your ownership interest, your 80%, goes to your heirs. It's that simple. It's tenancy in common, and it is the default here in North Carolina. Meaning if you and I buy a property and don't ask for something different, we will be tenants in common. Now, if we'd like to complicate it, we could say, hey, you and I are tenants by the entirety. That's if we're married. We could be joint tenants. In fact, let's look at our screen here. You've got A, B, C, and D. They could be joint tenants. Now, if we want to make these 4 people joint tenants, there's a couple of things that have to be valid, that have to be there. And that means you have to have PIT, or what I call PITT, possession, interest, title, and time need to be equal. What I mean by this is if we want to be joint tenants, we have to have equal possession. Our interest amounts have to be equal, and we had to take ownership at the same time. The deed or the piece of paper, the title has to be all of our names at the same time. This is how we get to qualify to be joint tenants. Now that seems a little complicated. Why would we want to do this? Because joint tenancy is the way to get the right of survivorship. The right of survivorship is the idea that when you have four people like A, B, C, and D, if you're joint tenants, then your ownership interest when you die doesn't go to your heirs. It goes to the remaining owners. So you see here in our example, if person A dies and they had 25% share, then now the only owners are B, C, and D, and they're each going to have 33 1/3%. This is the right of survivorship. This idea that when you die, your interest goes to the surviving owners. Right? Now, that's probably one of the reasons why they make it a little harder to get joint tenancy. It sounds like a Lifetime movie waiting to happen to me, but what do I know? I just watch a lot of Lifetime movies and Hallmark movies and romance novels, but that's beside the point. Right? So you want to have joint tenancy because it's a way to get the right of survivorship. So let's say in our little scenario here, you got B, C, and D who are now those 33 1/3% owners. Let's say D starts looking around and goes, A died kind of suspiciously. You know what? Maybe I should get out of here and I'm going to sell to Q. If owner D sells to Q, then Q now owns 33 1/3% of the property. However, Q is not a joint tenant. Q is a tenant in common, which means B and C are still joint tenants. So if one of them dies, it's going to go to the other. But Q is a tenant in common, so their life isn't in danger. If Q dies, then it's just going to go to their heirs. That is joint tenancy. Now, the last major type of co-ownership we need to talk about is going to be tenancy by the entirety. And you know from my flub earlier, tenancy by the entirety means that it's two people that own a property and they're married. So let's say you and your fiance buy a piece of property before you get married. You cannot be made tenants by the entirety. Now, what's so great about the tenants by the entirety? It automatically comes with the right of survivorship. So your surviving spouse doesn't have to worry about probate. However, again, this only applies to people who are married. If you buy property together before that, then you can't be tenants by the entirety. You're probably going to be tenants in common unless you ask to be made joint tenancy or joint tenants. Right? Now, joint tenancy, because it only happens in marriage, if somebody happens to get divorced, the divorce proceedings have to give a ruling with what happened to it. Like what happens to it. Is the husband going to buy out the wife going to buy out the husband? Is it a husband, wife? Open, no judgment here. It's just what happens to the property. It can't stay ownership by entirety if they're not married. So that's our co-ownership. And generally with those three major types of co-ownership, what we're talking about is ownership by, a smaller group of people. Sometimes you might have shared or co-ownership with hundreds of people. And in that thinking of is a condo. When you buy a condo, you're actually buying an apartment. An apartment and a condominium are the same thing. You just tend to rent apartments and you own condominiums. When you buy a condo, what you're getting is fee simple absolute and basically an apartment space. So you own the unit, the same thing that you control, that same area you control. When you're renting, is the same area you control and you own when you buy a condo. The common areas are then co-shared by all the other owners. So if you buy a condo unit in a building that's got 200 apartments or 200 units, then you own your specific unit, plus you own 1/200th of the structure of the building. You own 1/200th of the land underneath the building. You own 1/200th of the roof. In fact, when you buy a condo, you're sharing everything, including your need for insurance. And plus, you can't call Jake from State Farm up to say, hey, could you cover 1/200th of this roof? Instead, what you do when you own a condo is you pay required HOA dues, monthly HOA dues. So condos are when you buy an apartment, and they can stack above each other or they can go out side by side by side. It doesn't matter as long as what the new owner is getting is the apartment and fee simple ownership, and then co-ownership with all of the common areas. Now, a townhome is very similar to a condo, except a townhome, you're getting your unit and you're getting the land underneath, which is why a townhome will never be something that you see stacked up. It's when you have like row houses. When you buy a townhome, you're getting the unit and the land underneath. Except in a townhome, you don't get co-ownership of the common areas. You have the right to use the common areas because you're a member of the HOA. The HOA owns all the common areas, and there you go. I know it's been a lot, but we're almost done. The last thing we need to talk about with property ownership is this concept that you have to pay taxes when you own land in North Carolina. This is because of something called the Machinery Act, and we will go into a lot more detail in class. I do want to go over one thing with you that's going to be really important for the exam, and that is the timeline for taxes. Now, there's two really, really important dates you need to know. On January 1st of a calendar year, a tax lien attaches to the property. This is the county or city's way of saying, look, this property will owe us taxes. We may not know how much yet, but you definitely owe us. So if somebody closes on a house, sells a house, or buys a house before the taxes are due, the person who owns the house for the beginning of the year still owes for their portion of the taxes. The second really, really important date is going to be September 1st, and that is the date which taxes are due. In the state of North Carolina, taxes are due on September 1st, but they are not late until after the following January, or I should say in the following January of the next calendar year. It's kind of like with your rent. You know rent is due on the 1st. Well, taxes are due on the 1st, and just like with rent, which isn't late until the 5th, your taxes don't start collecting late fees unless you pay after January of the following year. So again, this is going to be something you're going to deal a lot with a lot. Well, there's a lot of a lots there, huh? So this is going to be something you'll deal with a lot in this class, but we'll look at the math when we're talking. Oh, and I should probably say, just to get your mind around it, how we calculate taxes here in North Carolina for property, that is what we call ad valorem. It's according to value, and it is based off of the number of 100s and the assessed value of a home. In other states, they use something called mills. We will definitely go into mills in class. I just wanted to give you a heads up so you weren't thoroughly confused. So that's it. I hope this was helpful. I promise there probably won't be any other section that's quite this long. This beginning section and trying to understand what real estate is, there's just so much. It's just so heavy. So I will see you in class. Now remember, this was a preview, not a review, and I still need you to read every other chapter beforehand. So I guess I'll see you later.